It's November 17th, 1970, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Arion, Rebecca, and Olly, the Retrospectors.
Stephanie Kahn was a glamour model whose acting credits include Confessions of a Sex Maniac, Can You Keep It Up for a Week, and The Benny Hill Show. So as you can imagine, getting her kit off for a photo printed today in history in 1970 was just another day at the office. But what made this raunchy yet oddly coy shot of a semi-nude Kahn in a field special is that she was becoming the first ever Sun page 3 girl.
Yes, this was the first of a more or less continuous 5-decade run for this feature. But at the time, it wasn't called Page 3. I mean, obviously it was on Page 3, but they were calling the feature The Birthday Suit Girl. The caption under her topless photo read, "The Sun, like most of its readers, likes pretty girls. And if they're as pretty as today's birthday suit girl, 20-year-old Stephanie Rahn of Munich," yes, there was a typo in her name, "who cares if they're dressed or not?"
Yeah, this was about a year after Rupert Murdoch had taken over The Sun, and he already was the owner of the, quite frankly, sex-obsessed News of the World. But what he had added to his stable in the Sun newspaper was an ailing highbrow broadsheet that he had pretty much bought under the promise that he was going to maintain its left-wing credentials. But, immediately he turned it to a tabloid. He changed it to be much more like the News of the World, and it was definitely filled with much more sort of sex and scandal, the likes of which really hadn't been seen in daily newspapers until this moment.
The initial idea was that the Page 3 girls are supposed to be girl next door types. The editor at the time, Larry Lamb, was very conscious that they were skating on the border of what was acceptable in a family newspaper. So the models were supposed to be wholesome looking girls with sunny smiles rather than sexy scowls, and they would use airbrush if need be to create those sunny smiles.
I mean, not so different, actually, to when we were talking about the first edition of Playboy and Hugh Hefner's goals with that. Obviously, Playboy was slightly more explicit and slightly more below the belt, if you like, in terms of its marketing, but still there's this sense of, and bear in mind, we're still in the sexual revolution. I mean, he bought the paper in 1969. Just like Hefner did, Murdoch put articles in the Sun about sex, sex problems in the kind of predecessors to Dear Deirdre, articles about how to achieve an orgasm in your partner, etc., which gave it this sheen of, we're just modern.
Yes.
We're just part of the sexual revolution. And think about the wording of that. The Sun, like most of its readers, likes pretty girls. Like, the insinuation is, if you don't like this, if you're affronted by this, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, within a year of introducing the Page 3 girl, the Sun circulation had almost doubled to 2.5 million. And one principle that did carry on was that the Page 3 girls should be clean and bright and wholesome, and Lamb's successor, Bernard Shrimsley, kept to this principle, once scrawling on a mock-up Page 3 image, "Nipples too fantastic. Make nipples less fantastic."
It's about disruption, isn't it? It's about disruption of the market. No one else is doing this. I mean, eventually the Daily Star did come along and do exactly this. Or even actually in the Mail, they'd have pictures of lingerie girls, but it had to be pegged to a news story. There had to be a reason. They'd come up with a stupid story. Samantha from Manchester is disgusted because she can't go and bathe in this swimming pool dressed like this, Whereas Murdoch was just like, no, we're going to use a naked image of a young girl because it's fun. It's nothing to do with the news. We're not going to pretend it's anything to do with the news. He always saw the Sun as radical. He didn't see it necessarily as moving it rightwards to turn it into a conservative supporting newspaper. He saw it as, vote for Thatcher because she's a disruptor, and I'm a disruptor too.
Totally. And there was another funny link to Thatcher, which is that Nipples Too Fantastic editor Shrimsley he once told reporters that his readers had a breast fixation because they were the first generation to be bottle-fed. And he added, half seriously, that Sun readers had voted for Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s out of gratitude, presumably for helping them overcome their breast fixation because, of course, it was Thatcher who was education minister in the 1970s, had abolished the practice of giving free bottled milk to every school kid in the country.
It is interesting, though, that it was very much about boobs.
Yeah.
I read an article in the FT about this. I was sort of astonished to see this phrase in the Financial Times. Quote, press commentators even speculated that if the Sun felt threatened by its imitators, Mr. Murdoch might even play the pubic ace. But I mean, that would have seemed off-putting to female readers, wouldn't it? In a way that for most female readers of The Sun in the 1970s, boobs didn't. Like, they apparently ran the pictures by female reporters on the paper as well, and would say, is this too much? Does this look too smutty? Or does this look wholesome to you?
By the time you got to the 80s, the new editor, Kelvin Mackenzie, sort of directed the team that he wanted Page 3 to become raunchy again. There was this new kid on the block, which was the Daily Star, and the Star had the ability to print pictures of its, inverted commas, starbirds in colour, and so it was sort of on the cusp of kind of breaking into the dominance of The Sun as Britain's #1 newspaper. But Mackenzie then hit back with his secret weapon, and that secret weapon was Samantha Fox.
She first appeared in 1983 at the age of 16, which wasn't illegal at the time.
I mean, it wasn't illegal at the time, but it
was gross at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
But she went on to be this huge star, but in a way that in itself was problematic. You know, some sources claim that she was the third most photographed British woman of the 80s after Margaret Thatcher and Princess Diana. I mean, for me, like growing up in a Sun reading household, the worst part was the caption. So initially, Page 3 would be accompanied by a line of cheeky double entendre, you know. This was later changed to listing the name, age and town of the model, reflecting that period where, you know, glamour models could become household names. In 2003, this was replaced with, in my opinion, the absolute worst part of Page 3, news in briefs, where the pic would be accompanied by a speech bubble containing a supposed quote from the model on a news topic of the day. I remember feeling really uncomfortable about it at the time, but not really being able to understand why. Obviously, as an adult, I can understand that the joke was that a topless model could have an informed opinion on a serious topic. It actually got worse over time because as the years went on, within the editorial staff, they understood that being the joke was a bit of a, you know, it was a bit uncomfortable. So what they tried to do was make it ironic by making the quote more and more comically intellectual. They made the language incredibly erudite, so they were trying to make the joke more than being, oh, a sexy woman has an opinion, but it ended up just punching twice, being like, oh, it's a joke because she wouldn't know those long words either. They really tried to make it acceptable, but they just made it worse.
That's a really interesting point about punching twice as well, because that's the other thing. Like, the joke sort of works if Page 3 does become leverage for a career. You know, and there had been these big stars, like you said, in the 90s even. You had Melinda Messenger, Katie Price, Jordan as she was then. But I saw an interview that she did on Loose Women a couple of years ago where she said that in those early days, her take-home fee, this is Jordan, her take-home fee was £30 for Page 3. She said you'd get paid 90, but after you handed over your agency fees and travel costs, you'd walk away with 30. So it's that thing of they're schoolgirls. They've got their boobs out on this hugely popular newspaper that's selling their image to boost its circulation, that's then taking the piss out of them for having an opinion and is paying them £30.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's probably all of that together that led to the feature's ultimate decline. In August 2013, it was the Irish Sun that led first, and they stopped featuring topless models on Page 3. But the main newspaper in Britain did this sort of stop-start thing, where they were at first reported to have followed suit in 2015 with the edition of the 16th of January that supposedly was the last to carry such photographs. But then there was this rowback where the Sun was like, haha, gotcha, and we're going to have more boobs and put the boobs back. But I guess at this stage, newspapers being in fairly terminal decline, it didn't do anything for them. They just quietly, subsequently, retired the feature altogether.
Well, I think they needed the argument explained to them of why is the representation of womanhood so high up in the newspaper, because it's typically male politicians on the front page. Why is the first woman that you see there with no clothes on, and that's the reason she's there? And what does that say about women? They needed that explained to them because actually a lot of people just thought, well, it's not immoral. I do like looking at pretty naked girls, and it's a thing. It's just the same as their cartoon, or it's the same as their crossword. It's a thing that I like looking at whilst I'm eating my bacon and eggs. And it doesn't mean that I think anything about women. And I think even Murdoch himself, actually, possibly delayed the decision on whether to axe this. He could see that popular opinion had turned against it, but because he's this disruptor, I think there was a sense of, well, I'm not going to axe it in a fervour of anti-Sun sentiment, because that looks weak.
If you do want to see a woman's breasts, though, and you have no way to connect to the internet, the Sunday Sport is the only remaining British tabloid still publishing Page 3 topless models.
Is that right? Can you not even in the Daily Star anymore?
No, it's all online. I mean, to be fair, if you're already online, there are other places.
There are other places. Interestingly, page3.com, which was the Sun's bid in 2015 to get the Page 3 readers online, now redirects to the Sun's articles about Katie Price. So they're still exploiting Jordan without paying her.
Wow.
And so another week of retrospecting ends. But next week begins a day early at Club Retrospectors. Join us now to get an exclusive episode every Sunday. Patreon.com/retrospectors.